Welcome to the Point of No Return podcast, a show at the intersection of technology and strategy. On this show, we interview industry leaders and experts to better understand how they think about strategy during this time of exponential progress.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Point of No Return podcast. On today's show, I spoke with Luke Finney, co-founder and head of operations at Terminal. I had the pleasure of meeting Luke on one of his trips here from San Francisco. Luke has a super interesting background and a very interesting startup that we speak about quite a bit, which is called Terminal. Terminal is in the remote teams space, and they help their partners basically scale teams faster using a remote workforce and help people work from where they want instead of having to relocate. And we kind of get into it because there's various aspects of their model that is very, very interesting and very, how should I say, cutting edge. Luke himself has an interesting background. He spent many years in the US Navy working with many small teams. And then when he left the military, he attended the Stanford Ignite program. And then he worked as an associate in a private equity firm. In 2017, he started Terminal in San Francisco, where he sees a vision of long-term access to companies looking for talent in disparate geographies. He's graduated from the US Naval Academy. He has a master's of science and administration and economics before going into the military. So we speak about that career transition as well, the lessons that he learned from the military, the idea and the vision behind Terminal, and also how he obtained financing from some of the world's most prestigious investors. Luke is building a very interesting startup in a competitive industry, and he has some very interesting insights. I think that you'll enjoy the conversation. Luke, it's a pleasure talking to you today.
Well, very excited to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. I'm happy we're glad to connect. Even though we're remote, you're currently in San Francisco. We did get to meet in person, Luke, so I'm really interested into what you guys do at Terminal. I find it a very interesting model. But before talking about your company, which I want to obviously spend quite some time on, I wanted to maybe just talk about early in your career. And my first general question would be: were you always interested in joining the military at an early age, or was it something you stumbled upon later in life?
Yeah, no, thanks. It actually is, I think back, it's hard to remember a time in my childhood where I wasn't thinking about joining the military. I don't know whether it was my interest in fighter jets and flying or whatever the case might be, but ever since I can remember, I always had a desire to serve. And as I continued to grow up, that translated into a desire to serve in the military. And so it was never something that I really questioned as a kid. More something I felt like that was the right move to go into. And, I wasn't sure about whether that was going to mean a career in the military or, just a short stint, as it turned out being. But there was always a desire to serve in some way, shape, or form. I felt like it was, a good way for me to give back to the country that I, had so much, had a great life and really had so much to be thankful for.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I saw that you were in the Navy specifically, and you had a few different roles there. Do you find that any of the skills that you acquired in the military are applicable to you later in life, like particularly now as you're running a tech startup?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, actually, when people think about the broader military, it may be hard for them to draw comparisons between that life and the skill sets there and tech startups. But I think it actually prepared me very, very well. One thing the military does extremely well is, train folks to a particular standard, run you through a rigorous system that instills discipline and also has a huge focus on leadership. And I think there's certainly examples of incredible leaders in the tech ecosystem. But sometimes I would say that in early stage tech companies, that aspect of leadership is put to the side in favor of technical knowledge or something like that, which is great for very early stage and product focus. But actually, as you get towards building and scaling teams and running large enterprises, I think that leadership component really comes to the forefront and is vital for success of an enterprise. So specifically for me, I think that, I learned a lot about how to build a team, how to work with people from different sets. That is the one thing the military is incredible about is no matter where you come from, no matter your background, your perspective, you're forced to work together and you're forced to keep these very high standards and you're forced to have this discipline. And what it allows you to do, or it forces you to do really is learn how to lead and be led and work side by side with people who are very different than you. And so I think in this day and age where there's a lot of polarization, that's very beneficial. I think the other thing is the discipline and the fact that when there's so many things in a tech startup that you could spend your time on, you do have to be almost ruthless about your prioritization and your discipline in attacking the most important things and realizing that even though, and I'm sure you've been in this situation, even though there's a number of things on fire over there, you have to focus on this one issue right now. Yeah. And I think that really came in handy.
Yeah, being able to laser focus and discipline, I think, are pretty key. Maybe I have more of a broader question about military. Always something I've wondered is, what do you think is the most misunderstood thing? Let's say when you're talking to like a regular civilian like myself, the thing that's most misunderstood about the military.
That's a really good question. The most misunderstood. I would say, top of mind is that when you look at the military, it's easy to see the bits and pieces that come up in the press, whether it's, particularly when the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were going on really full swing. It was a lot of frontline folks and the infantry and everything else. The reality of it is that the military is a massive organization that encompasses people of all different skill sets, from a cook to a pilot to an intelligence officer. So maybe what's a little bit misunderstood is just the full apparatus and how many things have to be working well to get to the outcomes and to achieve, the success that you'd like to have. That in of itself, as you become a leader in the military, you're forced not just to lead folks in your own particular discipline, but when I was in charge of a team, it was leading a specialist in communications, leading a specialist in intelligence, as well as folks from my own community. So I think that's probably maybe not necessarily misunderstood, but certainly it's hard to envision as somebody who hasn't been within that system.
Yeah, I can imagine that, most people really think, like soldiers in combat or tanks and planes, but that's probably just the tip of the iceberg of all the infrastructure and logistics needed for those people to accomplish their jobs. They need to have a whole, like you said, a whole organization behind backing them, ensuring that the whole supply chain is working essentially from many different angles. I imagine from a leadership, from a human resources perspective as well. So that's an interesting take. More of a maybe personal question is, you mentioned fighter jets. Curious to get what's your favorite fighter jet of all
time? Boy, there's sure a lot that are really interesting. I when I was a kid, I actually used to have those cards, the collectible cards and the binders of the aircraft of the world and everything else. Certainly, there's some iconic ones like a P-51 Mustang and others, but in modern day, the F-22 Raptor, which is flown by the Air Force, is really an incredible plane, from a technology standpoint. And talking to some folks who have flown them, you actually have cameras mounted on the outside of the aircraft. So when you have your headset up and you look down towards your feet, it actually shows you what's below the plane. So I think that is probably the most incredible aircraft that exists today.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. So yeah, like I'm more of a history buff, so I tend to look at things like, World War II battles, and where it was like you saw such a disparate level of technology used. It's not as streamlined as it is today. So yeah, even though I'm not an expert, I still find the subject interesting. And maybe to unwind, like, so you ended your career in the military. What led you to wanting to do something, venture out on your own in the startup space?
Yeah, it's a funny road that you walk in the transition between any career, I would say, but certainly, the one between a military lifestyle and civilian is is pretty drastic. I was really fortunate to have a great network of friends and family. And one of those folks was my brother-in-law, who has been a lifelong entrepreneur and started a number of companies. And as we were discussing, what I saw, kind of my life looking forward after the military, he really encouraged me to take a hard look into that creating a company and really following a couple of these ideas that I had and taking them to fruition. One of those ended up being what is now Terminal, and I'm sure we'll get to that later. But I would say part of that, having that network that says, it's not impossible, here are some steps, and kind of shows you the way, was really key in thinking about how to go through with this. And then, there was a number of things that I saw in the military in growing up that kind of convicted me around this idea of being able to provide opportunities to people in different places. And I was fortunate to have traveled, lived overseas as a kid, and certainly worked overseas with the military, and really wanted to do something with a global impact. And then when I stood back and took a look around at the options presented to me, I really saw that creating something of my own was the only way that I would be able to satisfy that itch and really target the impact that I was looking for.
Okay, interesting. And then from there, how did you use that framework to come up with a concept of Terminal? I imagine you didn't do this just on your own, or I'm just poking, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think as with a lot of interesting ideas and great companies, it was a mix of a number of different ideas. So when I left the military, I'd grown up overseas when I was a kid, actually, and traveled and worked internationally with the military. I'd seen a number of people who were incredibly smart, incredibly hardworking, and didn't have access to the opportunities that would allow them to fully maximize their own careers and continue to challenge them as they develop professionally, or to provide economically for themselves and their families. I took that idea at its base, and as I began to talk to people really within some of the folks that my brother-in-law introduced me to in his network, other entrepreneurs, stumbled into my co-founder, Dylan, who had, from a tech point of view, built engineering teams in Mendoza, Argentina, for Eventbrite. And I realized after getting to know Dylan and some other folks and talking with them about this idea, that the tech ecosystem and the tech community was probably the right way to have a tactical implementation of this broad idea that I had in my head. And from there, and from those relationships and those contacts, it kept developing and has turned into what Terminal is today.
Okay, very interesting. And so from there, how did you actually launch Terminal? What's the inception story?
Yeah. Dylan and I connected almost 2.5 years ago to talk through this concept. It really was around a marketplace where on one side you had, as I mentioned, people who were successful, intelligent, really driven, but didn't have access to particular opportunities. And what Dylan had seen in working in tech was companies that were hamstrung really by their ability to continue to grow and scale. They have an incredible idea that really, not to sound trite, is doing some amazing things and changing the way the world operates, but we're unable to find the right type of people to continue to grow those companies. So putting those two pieces together, we wanted to develop a bridge really that, rather than being transactional, and I think we'll get into the industry portion later, but rather than being a project-based or gig economy type of work, we wanted it really to be a long-term transformational sort of relationship between companies and their employees. And we wanted to create the structure and the framework around making that really easy for both sides to be connected, but once connected, continue that relationship. And that's, that's the core idea that Terminal started with, and, has now manifested itself with our offices across Canada and our expansion into Mexico.
Yeah, that's amazing. And from there, how would you describe what is Terminal today if you had to simply put it into paper?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we call Terminal today is a remote teams company. And it is what we provide is the infrastructure around setting up, scaling, and ensuring that your team is successful in a different market from headquarters, or in a brand new market, rather. I think as we look at the future of work, I think we will continue to see companies whose growth is driven not just in the one geographic location where they're at, but really in a distributed form where they're looking for the best in a particular skill set. And that will drive them to create multiple different offices, multiple different teams in other locations. And Terminal facilitates all of that.
And is this predominantly done with services or software, or a mix of both?
So predominantly, Terminal is three pillars, is the way we think about it. One of those is having deep knowledge of each of the markets. We do that through market surveys to determine where we launch a terminal in a new market, but we continue that with having recruiters in market to really be able to understand the technical skills and the people that are in that market. The second pillar is providing an incredible environment. So we build out workspaces that are catered to technical teams. And then third is to help the companies deal with all of the legal or economic or other administrative issues in that country or in that location, so that they don't have to worry about that. We take on the liability and the risk there to allow them to really focus on what matters, which is building a great team so they can continue to advance their product.
And it also looks like your idea that you guys have built has garnered attention from some of the some pretty world-class investors. So I'd love to understand the process of deciding that, hey, this is an idea where we need to have, strategic partners on board, and then B, how you went about getting some of these, household names to partner with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, it was as most things when it starts out, a humble idea. And as we continue to look at the business in the model, there's a lot of fragmentation in this sort of, as you, I think, mentioned earlier, offshoring or outsourcing or nearshoring. There's a number of different terms for it, which I would submit the Terminal doesn't necessarily fall into, but we can talk about that later. There's a number of there's a number of things that need to happen to allow that our sort of structure to scale quickly and effectively, and to provide the type of experience that we want to. And it became clear that for us, the goal was to create a massive impact globally, and so to build out that infrastructure ahead of time to make sure that we were able to scale this rapidly. It became clear that we needed to take on some venture money and to partner with some, really serious folks in the space. One, because we wanted to ensure that there was a premium brand around Terminal, that we are really focusing on the top 10% of engineers in any given market. But also because those same investors have a portfolio of companies, and this has been relayed to us through our investors and through others many, many times. The number one issue in these board meetings for any really successful, fast-growing startup is we just can't find the right people to join our team. And sometimes that's skill set, but sometimes that's loyalty, and sometimes that's engagement to really drive the company and the product forward. And so when we approached a number of these tier one, really high quality investors, initially I think they were hesitant because we're trying to create this new business model. But they quickly saw the value that a network like Terminal could bring to not only their portfolio, but frankly, every fast-growing tech startup. And I think they were really excited by that possibility, as we are, because the vision.
It sounds like it's an idea and a need really born out of this technological era that companies really need this kind of service more and more. Curious as to get your opinion on who or what you consider to be your competition today.
Absolutely. I think as I said, we're creating a new category in a way. So I wouldn't say that there is anybody directly competitive with us, although certainly in each of those pillars, there are folks that do the same thing and are competitive in that nature. So really, I think we're launching this new wave of thinking about how to grow your company and your team. I'm sure there will be folks cropping up in terms of copying the business model, but we're really excited about this being a blue ocean kind of opportunity and trying to grow as quickly as we can within it.
Yeah. And do you find that right now you have figured out that opportunity in the sense of you've obtained product market fit, quote unquote, and that right now you're just doubling down on the model, or are there still tweaks to be made and really figuring out before, let's say, you hit the foot on the gas?
I think if you talk to any company, there's always a balance between those two things. I think, even if you look at a company like Airbnb, which is continuing to accelerate, but also branching out in different things to understand where else they could add value. For us, I think at the core of the business, we've really found what works. We're continuing to hone and refine that all the while. But we are really excited about being able to step on the gas now. And we've spent the last year putting in place the foundation, the processes, the team that's necessary to get us to that point. So I would say, while we're not 100%, and I don't know if we ever will be, we're probably 90% of the way there, and really stepping on the gas in the coming year.
Okay, very cool, man. Very cool, very exciting. And where do you see maybe the industry as a whole going? Like, do you see your type of, obviously I think it's kind of a biased question, but it's like, obviously I think you see the need for the service that you provide and the solution that you provide to startups. How do you see the market maybe evolving a few years out into the future?
Absolutely. I think there was a wave maybe 10 years ago around the gig economy and project-based work. I think we've seen that shift. And I think even working from home, last year, IBM decided to stop doing remote working as a matter of policy. I think people are trying to figure out this balance between satellite offices, gig economy, remote teams. The industry as a whole, I think, that was moving certainly with certain global politics right now being the way they are, but also just mobility and the advent of education being available to people all over the world in such an easy form. With YouTube and online boot camps and everything else, I see the industry moving much toward setting up, or companies setting up, these smaller offices globally. I think we are fortunate to be on the forefront of that wave, but it will certainly be interesting as other companies that like TopTal and Upwork that promote the gig economy as they continue to grow, where the balance will land between kind of project-based work and full-time in headquarters work versus what we do, which is this idea of remote teams.
Yeah. And what do you think your biggest challenge is going to be in capturing that opportunity? Is it scaling the team? Is it funding? Just curious as to what keeps you up at night.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what keeps me up at night right now is partially this of our model. It's something new that we've put together, this amalgamation of these three different aspects, and explaining that and creating a simple way to understand what is a complex process is something that we're continuing to work with. The other thing I think is how do we grow in a smooth and sustainable way, but in a way that we continue to maximize impact to our members, which are the engineers that are working at a terminal for one of our client companies, and making that transition easy for them to understand what is terminal and what's the work that they're going to be doing for one of our clients, be it ZenReach or Eventbrite or MakeSpace.
Yeah, no, it seems like you guys are really at the cusp of something interesting. So, like, very good. want to obviously keep a close eye on you guys to see how you progress. So, like, best of luck and continued success in what you guys are doing. Luke, maybe one last parting question will be: is where can people learn more about the work that you're doing?
Absolutely. Our website is terminal.io. We've been publishing a lot of content there. So if you're curious about remote teams in general, I encourage you to go there and look at some of what we've put up. We also maintain a pretty active Twitter account. So follow us to hear the latest on what Terminal is doing, as well as, news from around the industry.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time, Luke.
Well, thank you so much, Nectar. It's been fantastic being here, and look forward to seeing you again in Montreal very soon.
Absolutely. We'll talk soon.
Thank you for listening to the Point of No Return podcast. Never miss an episode by clicking on the subscribe button on iTunes or Google Play.